Good evening, and welcome to the Cleveland Photographic Society's Nature Competition for September the 25th, 2020. We have our president, Mike Kopkas, here. He can run through a couple of announcements for us before we get started.
Hello and welcome to tonight's competition. We do have a few announcements though. We do have some upcoming competitions. October 2nd, we have our photojournalism competition, and the deadline for that is September 30th. And then on October 9th, we have our people and pictorial competition. The deadline for that is also September 30th. And then on October, that should be the 16th, not the 9th, we have a bee competition, and the deadline for that is October 7th. Some upcoming field trips. On October 3rd, we have a photo walk in University Circle, so you can check the website for information on that. October 17th, we're going to Ashtabula to look at covered bridges. Again, some information on the website on that. And then on October 25th, we're planning a Cuyahoga Valley Fall Colors photo shoot, and we will be putting details on that on the website in the near future. Also, just make you aware, we have begun virtual classes. Wednesday nights are fundamentals of photography, Saturdays are Photoshop editing, and Mondays are Lightroom. We're already a couple weeks into all of those, but we at least want to make you aware that those classes are being held virtually.
We'll also be putting up information about the winter sessions in the next week or so. Those classes will, at this point, be held virtual. If anything does change, we could go back to live instruction, but at this point, we are intending to proceed with virtual classes starting in January. You can watch this and all Friday evening meetings at your convenience on the CPS YouTube channel. There's a link on the front page of the CPS website, or you can simply go to YouTube and search for Cleve Photographic, all one word. We suggest that you subscribe to our channel and choose to be notified whenever a new video is posted. Our Friday meetings always post at 7:30 p.m. each Friday evening. Those recordings are then available for you to view at your leisure at any time in the future. So this is our second nature competition of the 2020-2021 year. Tonight we have a total of 103 images, 59 are nature and 43 are pictorial. Let's review our judges for the evening. First is Rick Braveheart. Rick has spent years living in and photographing America's parks and forests. He's a lifelong outdoorist, landscape photographer, and 15-time artist in residence for the National Park Service. He strives to capture the beauty of those lands using a wide assortment of digital and vintage black and white film cameras. I ask permission of nature to photograph and then listen quietly to the land, Braveheart says. In time, something begins to whisper quietly for my attention or touches my heart in ways my eyes alone would never have seen. His work is guided by a deep reverence and respect for nature, and he is honored to have received the U.S. Presidential Service Award from Barack Obama and the National Park Service. Tonight, Rick's comments will be read by our own Bill Keaton, our competition chair. Our second judge is Debbie DiCarlo. Debbie's photographic journey began at a young age with a Kodak Instamatic camera that used film cartridges and flash cubes. Today, her gear includes a Canon 5D Mark IV. Specializes in photographing landscapes, waterscapes, wildlife, and macro. She's best known for a photograph named The Howling Lesson, a photo of an adult coyote and two pups, and for winning the Popular Photography magazine's annual Reader Photo Contest in 2013. She founded Focus on Photography Tours, Workshops, and leads photography tours and workshops in the United States. Debbie's comments this evening will be read by our own Mike Kopkas. And our third judge this evening is Lori Diemer. Lori's a freelance professional photographer whose work has been exhibited regionally and nationally. Her work is featured in the permanent collections of the Lake County Hospital System, the Cleveland State University, and Innova Healthcare. After almost 20 years of participating in tours, workshops, and private photo trips, Diemer started leading her own tours on a professional level. Learning from others strengthened her desire to share her knowledge and experience with others. The visual arts have been a driving force in her life's journey, and she loves to travel within the U.S. and abroad. Lori's comments this evening will be read by Lori Diemer, Lori Culp. Sorry about that. Okay, for those of you unfamiliar with our competitions, we just wanted to review our judging criteria. Each judge scores an image on a scale of 5 to 9. The final score for each image is the total of all 3 judges' scores. Images are judged on 3 criteria, up to 3 points each: impact, composition, and technique. A perfect score is 27, which means each of the 3 judges gave the image a score of 9. These are very rare, but do occur on occasion. Let's see if we have any this evening. So we'll start with nature images. We will be reading the judges' comments for all of the nature images. When we get to pictorial, we will be reading some of the judges will comment on some of the images, but some will not be commented upon as chosen by the individual photographers.
Rick says, great horizontal bird placement and vertically balanced composition, dividing the bird and reflection. Lovely bokeh in background and good capture of the reflection. Focus on the main subject and the reflection are a bit too soft. Animal eyes are almost always better in sharp focus.
The image is by Michael Halper. It's entitled Alternate. 24 points, second place.
Okay, Debbie says this image is very impactful. The colors, textures, and lines in the leaf all keep my eyes looking at one beautiful element after another. The composition is really nice and the lighting is fantastic. Sharp where it needs to be, and the softness shows where there's a curvature in the leaf.
The photographer is Ron Werman. It's entitled Backlit Leaf. 21 points.
Okay, Lori says, these hummingbird moths are difficult to photo for sure. Nice capture here with motion of wings and sharpness of face. I know the bright floral pieces extreme right cannot be cropped out, maybe toned down a bit to make them less distracting, as well as the leaf lower right. Just a tad darker, nice exposure.
The photographer is Rick Carell. It's entitled Bee Balm Flight. 20 points.
Excellent use of harmonious and complementary colors from nature in this image, Rick says, and good use of fast shutter speed to stop motion. The flower contrasts nicely with the bee in terms of scale. Focus of both the bee and flower, however, are somewhat soft. Although I understand the challenges of avoiding movement when photographing in nature, sharp focus on the bee or even the bee's head alone could have been incredible.
The image is by Wayne Feuerstein. It's entitled Bee on a Flower. 18 points.
Okay, Debbie says, what a fantastic perspective on this caterpillar. Bokeh is soft and muted, letting the caterpillar be the star of the image. I appreciate seeing the feet peeking out from the opposite side of the stem because it shows real dimension of this beautiful tube of goo. Nice composition, perfect exposure, and great impact.
The photographer is Belinda Prins. It's entitled Black Swallowtail Caterpillar. 24 points, second place.
Lori says, beautiful flowing composition, blurring of the background, even exposure. It's sharp where needs to be sharp. Well done.
The image is by Vicki Wirt. It's entitled Canna Lily. 23 points, third place.
Rick says, stunning capture of sharply focused details at all depths of the main subject, set off with a visual border from the subtle introduction of bokeh in the background and details. Beautiful rendering of the contrasting flower colors, along with excellent subject placement. The placement of the petals near the 4 o'clock and 10 o'clock position of the flower come close to approximating a phi grid composition, which also helps draw the eye and set off the subject.
The image is by Dave Saborik. It's also entitled Canna Lily. It's also scored 23 points, and it's also third place.
All right, Debbie says, when I look at this image, I see a small tree showing toughness and determination to survive amongst such a rugged environment. The photographer chose to go with a short exposure to freeze the water. The result is beautiful. However, all of the textures, lines, and shapes in the rocks and splashing water compete for my attention. A longer exposure creating soft, dreamy water would have been a lovely backdrop for the tree and given my eyes something to land on and appreciate. Overall, a nice image and worthy of more experimentation.
The image is by Bill Keaton. It's entitled Clinging to Life. 19 points.
Lori says, nice to see a beautiful swallowtail intact, not too beat up. There are some distractions in the background that catch my eye, the bright leaves and sunspots, the wayward branch at left edge. If possible, I suggest toning down the tree bark with a paintbrush tool. If the bright sun is prominent, and should you have a diffuser, I may have tried blocking the harsh light or maybe create a shadow with body to lessen the light on the butterfly and soften the sharp shadows.
The image is by Wayne Feuerstein. It's entitled Colors of a Monarch. 19 points.
Wonderfully pleasing capture of contrasting colors in nature, Rick says. The second butterfly and flower in the background, which somewhat mirrored the main subject, the foreground butterfly, greatly added to a sense of place in this outdoor scene. While I understand the challenges of photographing flowers and insects in their natural environment, with the exception of the closest leaf in the bottom right, the focus seems somewhat soft throughout.
The photographer is Jane Sidney. It's entitled Double Vision. 20 points.
Debbie says, the shape of the petals and the vibrant colors of this flower are striking against the black background. While the colors are beautiful, the bright parts of the petals are distracting and keep pulling my eye away from the star of the show, the tiny insect. To make this image more impactful, the photographer might try cropping in such a way to eliminate the blurred petals in front of the insect and darken those bright areas on the petals in the background.
The photographer is Mike Kopkas. It's entitled Fiery Takeoff. 18 points.
Lori says, this is a nice calming photo, gives a nice sense of environment, but I am not sure what attracted the maker to the scene. If the fern, then isolate that a bit more. There seems to be a bit too much going on to the left and top, causing distractions from the lovely fern down front. Exposure looks dead on.
The image is by Bob Kowaleski. It's entitled Fawns Galore. 19 points.
Rick says this is an interesting concept for a nature shot and from experience, a challenging scene to photograph. Because of the monochrome treatment and similar grayscale tones of all the fish, large and small, the main subject feels lost and is difficult to discern. I wonder if this same scene in a full color capture would help set off the main subject. Also, removing the white fringing throughout the image, for example, on the far right side of the shark, would help.
The photographer is Keith Marchand. It's entitled Hammer Time. 20 points.
Debbie says, the colors in this image work really well together. The choice of lens and aperture was spot on. The bokeh provides context to the flower, yet allows the main subject to pop out of the clutter in the garden. The shot was timed perfectly, getting the bee hard at work. The lighting was a bit harsh, but the photographer managed it well. Overall, a nice capture.
The image is by Kathy Amari. It's entitled Happy Bee. 21 points.
Lori says, lovely family portrait of these snowy egrets. Nice feeding moment, but I would really like to see the third bird. Kind of odd seeing the beak protruding from the belly of the other. Might the maker have another that shows the one feeding the little guy? Feathers look sharp and eyes too.
The photographer is Bonnie Luxo. It's entitled Hi, Mom. 21 points.
Beautiful, stunning image, Rick says. Wonderful use of vibrant, contrasting colors and subject placement set off by a warm bokeh background. Great capture with focus on the body of a fast-moving subject. I had loved to have seen sharper details in the flower, especially the upper right portion, but that concern was less since my eye was continuously drawn to the hummingbird and vibrant colors.
The photographer is Donna Schneider. It's entitled Hummingbird in Cardinal Flower. 25 points, first place.
Okay, Debbie says snow, fog, or is it blowing snow, mountains. The monochromatic palette of this image is perfect for those elements. This scene creates some challenges with exposure given the mostly white top half and mostly midtones in the bottom half, but the photographer did a nice job of managing the two. There are multiple shots in this scene by cropping or using a telephoto zoom, for example. The true visual interest starts at the base of the mountains, so I would try a crop that eliminates the flat foreground, but a very nice image.
The photograph is by Jane Sidney. It's entitled Iceland Summer. 21 points.
Lori says, gorgeous. Fibonacci spiral in full effect here. Lovely focus and focus that enhances details, patterns, and textures of these nesting leaves. Well done.
The image is by Vicki Wirt. It's entitled Leafy Curves. 24 points, second place.
Rick says, nice concept for a nature shot, and choosing a 5-grid layout for this scene was a great way to set off the main subject. The overall image lacked enough contrast between the background and main subject, however, to help it stand out. Likewise, the sharp focus on the foreground leaf drew attention to the soft focus throughout the main subject, which is the flower.
The photographer is Susan Bestel. It's entitled Ligularia. 20 points.
Debbie says the choice of aperture and distance between the American goldfinch and the background made this a very striking image. Nice composition and a good sense of context with the inclusion of the seed pods. The eye is nice and sharp, which is extremely important, and the angle of the head is pleasing. This is a great image and could have been even better had there been a tiny catchlight in the bird's eye, but that's a tiny nit.
The image is by Rosemary Flanagan. It's entitled Lunchtime. 24 points, second place.
Lori says, I understand the creative intent of the maker here. I feel it falls short in that it's not completely blurred. Maybe wait next time and fall is just around the corner for the wind to really kick up and blur everything. The almost still leaves are just that tad out of focus to be distracting. Try a crop of the lower right corner encompassing the super blurry leaves, then I believe the abstract that was intended will be revealed.
The photographer is Ron Werman. The photograph is Maple in the Wind. 18 points.
Beautiful floral colors set off against a stunning bokeh of complementary background colors, Rick says. The main subject in this shot, however, feels off. The color discrepancies, widely varied, blurring of the details, etc. To bring out the subject more, I wonder if it was overworked in post-processing or cropped and then enlarged. It could be a great image to try again.
The photographer is Joseph Miko. It's entitled Obedient Plants, 20 points.
Debbie says, "Here's looking at you, kid. Wow, the photographer captured a very touching and impactful portrait of this orangutan. Nice catchlight in the eyes brings them to life. The angle of the head is really nice. Everything is sharp where it should be, and the composition is perfect. The lighting is well handled too. Even its deep-set eyes are not too dark. Well done."
Photograph is by Mike Kopkas. It's entitled Orangutan Stare, 22 points, honorable mention.
Lori says, good timing with the tongue. There are some pretty bright leaves to the left that can be cropped out or toned down to lessen their prominence. There's also an area of bright background upper right that should probably be toned down as well. The snake's eyes are sharp and the exposure is spot on.
The image is by Kathleen Amari. It's entitled Parcel Tongue, 20 points.
A captivating nature scene that grabbed me immediately, Rick says. Excellent balance of the main subject in sharp focus set off against a pleasing bokeh background. Lighting on the owl and curved branch below makes this a great example of incorporating a vertical Fibonacci spiral, a type of golden ratio composition, to set off a subject.
Photographer is Jackie Sieski. It's entitled Perfect Place to Scout, 22 points, honorable mention.
Debbie says, everything about this image is a wow. Technically well done. It's tack sharp and exposed perfectly. The blurred background leaves no doubt as to what the photographer wants you to see. The mantis on a slight diagonal is also a very pleasing composition.
The image is by Belinda Prins. It's entitled Portrait of a Praying Mantis, 24 points, second place.
Lori says, this is a lovely portrait of this dahlia. Compositionally, bringing the center of the bloom would be a bit more pleasing than having it upper right border. The exposure is very nice.
Photographer is Kathy Amari. It's entitled Purple and White Dahlia, 24 points, second place.
Rick says, seen in heavily forested areas like this are always a challenge to photograph because of all the similar details in the trees, shrubs, grasses, and etc., which can often look busy in the final shot. Without carefully planning and positioning of the camera, it's hard to set off the main subject for the viewer's eyes to discern. Here, I wasn't certain what the main subject was. I did notice the white-gray slanting birch tree on the right and younger tree with a similar angle behind it. If this was the intended subject, I wondered if moving the camera somewhat to the right or even 180 degrees straight ahead to the other side of the smaller tree would help the subject stand out.
The photographer is Bob Kowaleski. It's entitled Pushover, 18 points.
Debbie says, this guy is smiling because he knows the photographer captured his good side. This image is visually stunning in every way. The white fur against the black background really pops. Every whisker and eyelash is tack sharp. The texture in its fur is wonderful, and there's a tiny catchlight in the eye. A wow image.
Photograph is by Robert Boyle. It's entitled Kichi Alpaca, 22 points, honorable mention.
Lori says, exposure and composition is spot on. Lovely capture with the lioness in a good spot of light, surrounded by darkness of the foliage and space behind to the left. Eyes look sharp, which is most important when photographing anything with eyes.
The image is by Fran Marino. It's entitled Queen of the Jungle. 24 points, second place.
Rick says, interesting floral close-up with dramatic red-violet colors set off against the white petals. The cream color stigma center of the flower looks out of focus, and portions of the style look over-sharpened or overworked, and the overall edges are also somewhat out of focus. It might be interesting to try capturing this image again in lower light and or a deeper depth of field.
Photographer is Fran Zonizer. The image is entitled Rose of Sharon, 19 points.
Debbie says, what a happy image. The blue sky and white cloud are very well exposed and complementary to the sunflowers. Technically, it is perfect. The main subject is nice and sharp and perfectly exposed, and the background is nicely blurred, but still provides a sense of environment and context. Composition is perfectly in the rule of thirds. My only wish is that the photographer found an open flower rather than one that is closed. It would have had much more of a wow factor.
The image is by Michael Halper. It's entitled Shy Guy, 21 points.
Lori says, nice moment here. The only thing I'm fighting with is the directionality of the eagle's flight. I understand if that's how he was really flying, but in our Western culture, we tend to view moments of motion left to right. Can the maker flip this image horizontally? See how they feel about it. Does this guy have a fish in his talons? The eyes look sharp, which is always critical.
The photographer is Keith Marchand. It's entitled Skimming the Surface, 22 points, honorable mention.
A delightful nature scene of a spoonbill at home in its natural surroundings, Rick says. Nice attention to detail in selecting an appropriate f-stop ISO to produce good detail sharpness in the feathers and greenery, especially in an outdoor setting like this subject to movement. In a future similar situation, waiting longer or capturing multiple images in sequence might have also helped reveal the entire beak, not partially hidden by the greenery.
The image is by Nancy Kekelik. It's entitled Spoonbill in Tree, 22 points, honorable mention.
Debbie says, such a pretty, happy yellow flower. The shooting conditions were tough, though. Bright sun on the flower, creating deep shadows in the background. The brown object to the left of the flower, the bright stem, and the red object keep pulling my eye away from the main subject. A few minor tweaks would have really made this flower pop. For example, wait for better lighting conditions like early morning, closer to sunset, or an overcast day. Or make better lighting by shading the flower with your body or a diffuser. Also, to keep the viewer's eye on the star of the image, try to remove bright, distracting items in the background or shoot from a slightly different angle so they weren't as noticeable.
The image is by Jim Rowe. It's entitled Starburst, Washington State, 20 points.
Lori says, lovely portrait of another lovely dahlia. Exposure is dead on nice, though the focus could be a tad more sharp. Nice composition with the center of the bud in a nice place in the frame.
The photographer is Marge Brady. It's entitled Summer Beauty, 21 points.
This is an intriguing, dreamy nature scene with interesting balance of subjects, Rick says, focus areas, and contrasting colors. The incorporation of the two butterflies in flight with wings extended and blurred foreground flowers that look almost cotton-like adds much interest to the shot. Although some elements in the scene were clearly in motion, I would have loved to see what it looked like with at least portions of the image in sharp focus, like one butterfly or the central flowers.
Photographer is Jackie Sieski. It's entitled Summer Day. 22 points, honorable mention.
Debbie says, lovely autumn scene of this waterfall. The choice of shutter speed is really excellent, giving the water some softness, but also some texture. The waterfall from the side provides the viewer a sense of scale and dimension, which is really nice. The colors are saturated and rich, which leads me to believe the image was taken with a circular polarizer and after a recent rainfall. There are a few things that are unfortunate, though. It appears there is a water spot or two on the right side of the frame, and the shadows have been opened up in post-processing, giving them a slightly noisy, muddy look. Nonetheless, this is a beautiful image.
The photographer is Susan Mahorsic. The image is entitled Waterfall in the Rain. 22 points, honorable mention.
Lori says, I like the intent of this image. Using a flash really hinders the delicacy of this macro shot. The shadows are a bit harsh. Can the maker try with a diffuser on the flash next attempt? If taken outdoors, try using a diffuser to soften the light.
The image is by Robert Boyle. It's entitled White Flower Number 1. 19 points.
Rick says, interesting nature scene with strong contrasting elements and colors. I suspect it could be improved with greater depth of field, since the rocks on the lower right appeared in sharper focus than any of the plant elements. Because of the visual border around the top, left and right sides, it might prove interesting to capture this image again by repositioning the camera to minimize leaf drop-off at the bottom or introduce vignetting.
The photograph is by Gary Marich. It's entitled Yellow Trout Lily, Sylvan Loop, North Chagrin Reservation. 20 points.
Debbie says, the photographer was undoubtedly in somewhere very special when they made this photograph. All of the textures, lines, and patterns are very interesting and kept my eyes wandering around to take it all in. The trees and scrub brush provide scale to the immensity of the area. Very pleasing composition with the tallest tree at the rule of thirds and nice and sharp. Well done.
Photograph is by Dennis Wirt. It's entitled Zion Patterns. 20 points.
Lori says, nice landscape image, but a bit too cluttered. What drew the maker to this scene? Textures, shadows of the branches, colors of the soil contrasting with the colors of the brush? I often advise if there's nothing of interest in the sky, don't include it. Yeah, it is a nice blue, but lends little to the scene. If able to revisit, try on a cloudy day or just after a rain, and you'll find an entirely different capture.
The photographer is Dan Lester. It's entitled Australian Outback. 20 points.
Wonderful, intriguing inset macro with excellent lighting and beautiful color rendition, Rick says. Careful attention to focus and depth of field is clearly obvious with crisp details in all elements. This image stopped me at first wondering what I was looking at and made me wish I could see more of the insect. But that in-your-face portrait forced me to study and admire all the details even closer. Very nice.
The photograph is by Chris Bosworth. It's entitled Cicada. 21 points.
Debbie says, such a pleasing image in so many ways. The side lighting is beautiful and provides really nice dimension to the cow's body and head, and the shadows are open enough to still see details. I especially like the light coming through the ear. Technically well executed, very sharp facial features and ear, and then slightly soft in the back, which puts the viewer's eye exactly where you want it, and eliminates any distractions in the background. I'm not at all bothered by the framing and the partial eye on the right side, but I do wish the tip of the ear on the left was included and that tiny white area was removed in post-processing. I can't believe I'm saying this, but this could be the prettiest cow portrait I've ever seen.
The image is by Kim Wasilewski. It's entitled Daisy. 20 points.
Lori says, strike a pose. Lovely regal portrait of this gorgeous tiger. Exposure and focus spot on sharp as it should be. Lovely composition, nice blurred background, wouldn't change a thing.
The photographer is Bill Keaton. It's entitled Eye of the Tiger. 23 points, third place.
Rick says, lovely nature study with rich complementary colors and good positioning of the central subject. Those colors, along with a somewhat soft focus, gives it a pleasing painterly look. It might be interesting to try this again with a somewhat different camera position to give the focus of the petals in the lower right area a similar soft focus appearance, since that area of the image feels much softer than the rest of the image.
The photographer is Nancy Kukelik. It's entitled Fiery Dahlia. 21 points.
Debbie says, oh boy, this raptor was not happy about something or was telling the fledglings to stop arguing with each other. Sometimes when shooting up at a bird, we get an uninteresting white sky, but this photographer luckily captured a pleasing blue backdrop. Well done. And the bird mid-squawk makes for a powerful image. It was in a nice position, too, with the branches forming a frame. Technically, it could use some work, especially with the focus. The eyes of any subject should always be sharp, and in this case, they are not. Bird photography is tough, so I encourage the photographer to keep at it.
The image is by Gary Marich. It's entitled Golden Eagle, Ghost Ranch, Steamboat Springs, Colorado. 16 points.
Lori says, I like the intended composition here. I'm not sure a solid black background is the best choice. I lose parts of the butterfly as they are black as well and blend right into the background. I know he has a body, but I cannot see it. A gray or lighter background option might improve this image. A softer light source, like clouds maybe, but I realize if this was outdoors, those things are hard to control.
Photographer is Miss Melissa Borovic. It's entitled Gothic Butterfly. 21 points.
Rick says a delightful floral with vibrant colors that forms a beautiful contrast to the almost diamond-like anthers in the center. Focus point seems centered slightly to the left and falls off towards the right. Since those anthers in the center of the flower are so striking, this could be an excellent subject to experiment with focus stacking.
The image is by Susan Bestel. It's entitled Hardy Hibiscus. 23 points, third place.
Debbie says, nice perspective on this flower. When flowers droop downward, it's really great to get low like this photographer did. Well done. One thing that tends to be distracting is the unfortunate bright green leaves behind the stem, because my eyes keep going there, which is probably not what the maker intended. My recommendation would be to get even lower or find another stem of flowers with a more pleasing and complementary background.
The photographer is Jim Rowe. It's entitled Hosta Number 3. 20 points.
Lori says, great stop motion capture here. Everything that needs to be sharp looks sharp, and the exposure is good. Not 100% sold on the bright white bokeh taking up 50% of the image. It does isolate the flower, but maybe toned down a bit could lessen its brilliance.
The image is by Rick Carell. It's entitled Hummingbird in Rain. 25 points, first place.
Rick says the center point and also angularity of the subject placement gives a photo a fun and intriguing look that draws the viewer's eye. Beautiful depth of field focus provides excellent details of all part of the subject and also a delightful focus fall off towards the top left. Very nice.
The image is by Fran Marino. It's entitled Mr. Crab Going Uphill. 20 points.
Debbie says, nice portrait of this colorful iguana. It appears the photographer chose a more shallow depth of field, rendering the background soft, yet maintaining a sense of environment and allowing the iguana to stand out as the main subject. It also appears the focus was set on the side of the animal. You can see lots of texture in the skin. Unfortunately, the eyes and mouth are real soft, and that takes away from the impact of this image. I wonder if the photographer could have taken a step or two to the right to eliminate the distracting branch directly in front of the animal. The image would have been much stronger if that was possible.
The photographer is Bonnie Luxo. It's entitled My Multicolored Coat. 20 points.
Lori says, really, really nice flowing composition here. Complementary colors are very pleasing. Exposure is spot on and the focus is excellent.
Photographer is Dave Saborik. It's entitled Pearl Crescent Butterfly. 23 points, third place.
Rick says scenes like this are always a challenge to photograph because of all the similar trees and aquatic plants throughout the scene that fight for the viewer's attention. The contrasting colors and reflection of the lighter trees against the green leaves are intriguing. It makes me want to ask what the photographer wants me to consider the main subject. If it's the lighter trees and the reflection, this might be interesting as a pano by cropping off the top bottom thirds. Because of its placement, though, the tree bush in the very center seems to be what I should consider the center, but it's too muted to balance the image left to right.
The photographer is Rich Foley. It's entitled Sand Quarry Lake. 18 points.
Debbie says, I really enjoyed this image a lot. Compositionally, the angle of the wings mimics the angle of the rock and together creates a nice diagonal line. Technically, the bird, rock, and dinner are all super sharp, and even the droplet of water is nicely in focus. I may have brightened this up slightly in post-processing, making the bird more white and less blue, but all in all, this is a wonderful image.
The photographer is Kathleen Amari. It's entitled Seagull Supper. 24 points, second place.
Lori says, another nice Hummer portrait. I know these guys are hard to photograph, so good job here. In the original, is there any room to the right? This guy is dead center, thus a bit static compositionally. Would like to see maybe a recrop with more room to the right for him to fly into. Exposure is a tad hot, but nice that it shows the details.
The photograph is by Joseph Miko. It's entitled The Queen. 24 points, second place.
Rick says, very nice, interesting vertical nature portrait with center composition and positioning of the subjects. Lovely background bokeh helps set off the butterflies and foreground leaves. On the submitted images, focus of the main subject feels a bit off, overworked in post-processing, or the ISO is so high as to introduce color noise. I realize this may not be the case in the original image, but it seems to be in the uploaded version.
The image is by Rosemary Flanagan. It's entitled Two Monarchs. 21 points.
Debbie says, simplicity at its finest. The black and white works superbly for this image. The background is a soft, dreamy canvas, allowing the details to be the focal point. The exposure is perfect. There isn't much I would change about this image. Very well done.
Photographer is Fran Zonizer. It's entitled Weeping Foxtail, 21 points. That concludes the nature competition for this evening. We'll proceed now with the pictorial images. As we said earlier, for the beginning here, we will simply show the photographs and read the scores. We will then proceed with the images selected by the photographers for judges' comments. First image is by Fran Zonizer. It's entitled Alternate View of Metro Parks, 20 points. Richard Ader, Amish Boy 4, 20 points. The photographer is Gary Marich. It's entitled Aspen Grove, Pearl Lake, Steamboat Springs, Colorado, 19 points. The image is by Donna Schneider. Big South Fork, Milky Way, 22 points, honorable mention. The photographer is Bonnie Luxo. It's entitled Bridge to Serenity, 18 points. Joseph Miko, Brown-Eyed Susan, 23 points, honorable mention. Rick Mills, Chagrin Falls, 21 points. Photographer is Nancy Kukelik. It's entitled East Channel Lighthouse, 21 points. The image is by Richard Ader. It's entitled Egyptian Herder, 25 points, second place. The image is by Susan Bestel. It's entitled Fountain of Youth, 24 points, third place. The image is by Dave Saborik. It's entitled Hibiscus, 25 points, second place. Jim Rowe, In the Glen at Watkins Glen, 21 points. Images by Bill Keaton. It's entitled In the Light of the Moon, 21 points. Photographer is Rich Foley. It's entitled Old Stone Statue, 20 points. Photographer is Susan Mahorchik. It's entitled Owl's Head Mountain, Peacham, Vermont, 21 points. The image is by Kathleen Amari. It's entitled Pink Ladies, 22 points, honorable mention. Fran Marino, Raspberry or Original, 19 points. photographer is Rich Foley. It's entitled River Flats. 22 points, honorable mention. Photographer is Rick Carell. It's entitled Spring Color. 20 points. Photographer is Marge Brady. Sunrise Mist in the Valley. 24 points, third place. Rosemary Flanagan, Tiger Swallowtail on Milkweed, 20 points. The image is by Dennis Wirt. It's entitled Time Machine, 20 points. The image is by Kim Washaleski. It's entitled Tutu Tubes, 20 points. Photographer is Rick Mills. It's entitled Two People Watching Sunset, 21 points. Remaining images will contain judges' comments.
Lori says, I see the intended composition here. I believe it falls a bit short in that the window view alone can stand on its own, and the dimly lit sink, etc., is a distraction. Maybe it's that mirror and the cabinet lower right. Simplify the bottom and try again.
The photographer is Wayne Feuerstein. It's entitled A View of Bantry Bay, Ireland, 21 points.
Rick says a delightful and visually interesting landscape scene. Nicely timed long exposure producing a ribbon-like effect on the waterfall portion along with the light-colored cottony or silky cast-off areas below draw the viewer's eye toward the center. The sun flare adds to the visual interest in an area where the eye can wander to through the image. The photographer might consider pulling back on the greens a bit since portion of the stone wall and two trees in the center look like they were photographed with a green filter.
The image is by Lyndon Ellis. It's entitled After the Storm, 22 points, honorable mention.
Debbie says, great bokeh on this image. It's a nice, soft blur of green. The flower and insect are nice and sharp. You have to be quick to capture a shot like this, but if at all possible, compose with the subject closer to the top of the frame. In this image, there is a bit too much empty space above the bee, so my recommendation would be to crop about 1/3 from the top. That would significantly strengthen this image.
The photograph is by Belinda Prince. It's entitled Alone on the Job, 22 points, honorable mention.
Lori says, superhero in the making. The unconventional perspective makes this portrait a winner. The color composition is very nice and the exposure is spot on. This young boy's eyes are sharp and the blurred background is very well thought out.
The image is by Michael Halper. It's entitled Aspiring, 23 points, honorable mention.
Rick says a small color palette, almost monochromatic, in this work and visual fade-off of details into the fog adds an interesting, classic, and almost vintage look to the photograph. This is enhanced by the soft focus from the fog in the entire right half of the image. With 2/3 of the image containing trees and 1/3 the fog, The piece feels weighted toward the right, which is fine, but it might be interesting to consider what the overall work would look like with 1/3 more fog and 1/3 less trees.
The photographer is Susan Mahorchik. It's entitled Autumn in Vermont, Peak Photographer Season. 18 points.
Debbie says, such a pretty combination of colors. The flower and monarch are perfectly in focus. The composition is so nice with the wings nestled in the top corner like that. Trying to get the exposure correct with harsh, bright sunlight is a challenge, as seen here. The butterfly is shaded somewhat and dark, and the background is brightly lit. If you expose for the butterfly, then the leaves in the background might have been completely blown out. Despite the challenges, the photographer did a nice job and made a very pleasing image.
Photo is by Kathy Amari. It's entitled Backyard Garden. 21 points.
Lori says, nicely done lightbox portrait. I think this technique is great for really showing the viewer all the cool details of critters like this crustacean, crawdad or lobster. Nice composition and exposure.
The photographer is Keith Marchand. It's entitled Claws. 23 points. Honorable mention.
Rick says, as a nature pictorial photograph, this is an interesting work to comment on since traditional pictorials have the presence of artistic interpretation, and this clearly does. It's intriguing how the image contains live human subjects along with the staged artistic elements. Although the photographer may have had specific intentions when post-processing the work, the sharpness and crisp lighting of the models seems somewhat at odds with the soft focus of the stage elements, especially near the back of the man's right leg. That soft focus also seems to get carried through to the man's pants, but is not visible in his hands or face. A very nice concept and execution.
Photograph is by Jackie Sieski. It's entitled Flying Home. 25 points. Second place.
Debbie says, the photographer shot this image from a low perspective, which gives it a menacing look. There is so much to take in. The shards of glass on the floor and in the windshield, the textures on the walls and ceiling, even the muted color palette makes this so very appealing. Technically spot on, don't change a thing. Exposed so well, the shadows still have enough detail yet provide moodiness. It would have been interesting to see a slightly different composition, perhaps less floor in the foreground, which may have exaggerated the front of the car and gotten us a closer look at the grunge.
Photograph is by Bob Kowaleski. It's entitled Forgotten. 21 points.
Lori says, lovely scene. The exposure is nice as it shows the textures and details in this passageway. I would like to see a bit more room under the front-bottom crosspiece of the closest bench. Be sure to sweep the edges of your frame to check for tangents of items too close.
Photograph is by Robert Boyle. It's entitled Fort Brimstone. 22 points. Honorable mention.
A lovely nighttime landscape pictorial with excellent attention to focus, depth of field, and a balanced exposure, which is not always easy in such long exposures, Rick says. It might be interesting to try cropping slightly, perhaps 1/10, on the right to eliminate the brightest section of the image, or burn that area in just slightly if the artist does the post-processing.
Photographer is Donna Schneider. It's entitled Golden Gate Bridge. 23 points. Honorable mention.
Debbie says, oh my, this image really has the wow factor and exemplifies the word drama. The texture in the swirling clouds mimics the texture in the rock structures. The exposure is punchy. There are bright whites and dark shadows and various levels of gray in between. The photographer composed it very well. Super image.
The image is by Dennis Wirt. It's entitled Grand Skyline. 21 points.
Lori says, love those hoodoos. The light here seems a bit harsh. Red Rock Country is best photographed in early twilight or dusk. But I do understand we can only be at certain places at certain times sometimes. It took me a quick second to realize there were two more hoodoos behind the ones in front. Maybe a change in shooting positions would separate the two groupings a bit more. Create some isolation of one or of the other groupings.
The image is by Jane Sidney. It's entitled Hoodoo Sunset. 20 points.
Rick says, nice concept for a structural base landscape pictorial with crisp blacks of the bridge set off with dramatic sky colors. Likewise, the raised bridge helps tell part of the story. Because of its large placement almost in the center of the scene, however, the sun flare feels too harsh and fights with the delicate colors. It would be interesting to consider what would happen shifting the camera position to the left somewhat to minimize that flare, or waiting until the sun settled on or below the horizon.
The photographer is Mike Kopkas. It's entitled Jacksonville Sunset. 19 points.
Debbie says, the photographer composed this image of the old train cars really well. The cars are offset and there is breathing room between, adding some idea of their length. The exposure on the cars is good. The shadows could be a tad bit lighter, but as shown, they give the viewer a hint at the scale of the platform and the coupling mechanism on the front of the cars. The entire image seems soft to my eye, and maybe that is what the photographer intended. I'm not sure about the treatment of the sky. It could be a texture overlay or an oil paint filter used to hide an otherwise uninteresting gray sky. In any case, I see numerous other compositions here that would exclude the sky, and hopefully the photographer can go back to this spot and experiment further.
Photograph is by Marge Brady. It's entitled Past Their Prime. 20 points.
Wow, Lori says, wow, just lovely still life. Much thought taken into setting up these elements in a very pleasing way. The placement of the lighting was carefully considered as well. Exposure spot on. Nice image.
The photographer is Vicki Wirt. It's entitled Ready to Bake. 26 points, first place.
Rick says a very interesting pictorial that could also be considered a documentary or photojournalistic work. The use of black and white to accentuate the subtle details in the overall scene in this piece was a great choice, as was the positioning and the angularity of the locomotive in this photo. Careful attention to lighting, depth of field, and focus throughout the subject area is clearly obvious. Also, the angularity of the brick walls, wood beam ceiling, and glass block windows present a nice contrast to the curvilinear elements of the locomotive.
The image is by Richard Ader. It's entitled Rebuilding Locomotive. 23 points, honorable mention.
Debbie says, wow, this image is really dramatic. The texture and color in the clouds mimics the texture and color in the dark water, and the soft sunset sunrise colors are reflected nicely in the foreground. My congratulations to the photographer. The horizon is perfectly straight, which is a detail that is sometimes overlooked, but not in this image. Care was taken to expose for the brightest parts in the sky, meaning there is no loss of detail in the highlights. That's good. There is sharpness throughout, which helps build the drama in the waves. A small suggestion would be to zoom in a tad bit closer to those waves and eliminate the flat water in the foreground. By doing that, the drama would have been kicked up a few notches.
The photographer is Rick Mills. It's entitled South Haven Beach Sunset. 20 points.
Lori says, lovely composition of lighting and color. Exposure is very nice and sharpness spot on. The unconventional direction of this falling bud is very pleasing and successful.
The image is by Ron Werman. It's entitled Uncurling. 23 points, honorable mention. And that concludes our Nature and Pictorial Competition for this evening. If you'd like some more information about competing or to join the Cleveland Photographic Society, please visit our website, www.clevelandphoto.org. We want to thank all of our judges and our readers this evening, and congratulations to all of our winners, and thanks to all who entered. We always appreciate your feedback on our video broadcasts. Please take the time to let us know how you think we're doing, and if you have any suggestions for improvement, please send that feedback to us at info@clevelandphoto.org. A reminder that next Friday we'll be back with you. We will have a photojournalism competition. The deadline to enter that is this coming Wednesday, September the 30th. That's also the same date to enter our next People competition, which will be on October the 9th. So please plan to join us then, and thanks for being with us this evening. We hope to see you again next week.